Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this fireside chat. Pleased to have with me Amy Merrill, architect of Article 6 and CEO of Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. Quite a mouthful. Amy, thank you for joining us this afternoon for this fireside chat. So let us kick off. What is your theory of change for carbon markets? And back to the question at hand, what is the business case for carbon markets for corporates?
Thanks very much, Anshari, and thanks very much for the invite to be here and with you all today to talk about how carbon markets are playing out in Asia and what to look for. The theory of change we have in the Integrity Council is around the core carbon principles, 10 fundamentals for high integrity in the market, around the way that carbon projects are managed, designed, and delivered. And the underpinning theory is that if we can sort out integrity in the market, if we can build integrity in the market, we'll be able to scale this market. And carbon markets are a purpose-driven market. They are there to deploy carbon finance and achieve mitigation that otherwise just doesn't happen because the signals are not in place to make it happen otherwise. So our theory of change is if we can bring together the market around high integrity, transparent, robust, functioning markets, we can bring investment, we can bring scaled opportunities for mitigation, particularly in this region, and scale markets for climate action and for finance to flow to certain communities and certain technology types.
Thanks, Amy. That's a good start. But the reality today is also there's a lot of headwinds, right? So carbon markets for the past couple of years has faced quite a lot of scrutiny. So corporates are now pulling back in terms of investing in and purchasing carbon credits, in part because there's a lot of criticisms around the quality of supply. Maybe you can share with us on that front, how is ICVCM looking to shore up confidence around the credibility of carbon credits themselves?
Thanks, Anshari. So the way the ICVCM and the core carbon principles are contributing to solving that problem of mixed quality in the past is by a rigorous assessment process of all of the standards that generate systems for issuing carbon credits and all of the design systems, they're called methodologies, that are used to generate carbon credits. So through a really robust framework of actual assessment, we're going through everything that's been happening in the voluntary carbon market and identifying which parts of it are good and can move forward and we can continue to enhance and build, and which types of design and programs need to evolve to create high integrity markets. And that will rebuild trust in what has been a fairly bespoke, boutique, and kind of inconsistent and not very transparent market. And that consistency will help investors come back to the market. The outcome of the work of the ICVCM with the core carbon principles is to label credits with an approval label. And that helps buyers understand that this extra layer of review has been gone through, that the systems behind that credit are in place, that credit is at least a ton, it takes into account social and environmental conditions in a wider perspective on what's high integrity in the market, and that labeling system helps investors see what good looks like and enables them to come back into a market with confidence that they won't be accused of greenwashing and they will be able to have credible decarbonisation pathways that they can actually meet, supported by carbon credits.
And that's an important line that you mentioned, right? Having confidence in the use of carbon credits. If I could expand on that, what do you think are the largest or the biggest misconceptions around carbon markets, both voluntary, compliance, and how should corporates navigate this space? And how will you debunk some of these misconceptions around carbon markets?
So I think one of the challenges that the carbon market in the corporate space has faced in the past is that corporates have been accused of using it instead of actually decarbonising. And early in the history of the role of corporates in decarbonisation journeys, there were no frameworks around how they behaved or what they did. And in some cases, corporates continued to operate and just used carbon credits to say that they were green or whatever. But that's actually quite a long time ago now. And there's a real understanding now within the kind of ESG, the corporate action, the climate action space for corporates, that everybody needs a credible decarbonisation pathway, and that within that decarbonisation pathway that involves, processes in your value chain, efforts to move off different types of fossil, genuine reductions within your business, there is a role for carbon credits in supporting that journey. And actually, evidence shows that where corporates are taking action on climate, by having a decarbonisation pathway, carbon credits help them go that bit further in their own internal emissions journey. And so if we can get the market to understand the way that corporates should engage in decarbonisation, we can scale the number of corporates taking real action on climate and give them meaningful and credible ways of actually doing that really fits an ambitious way of decarbonising and the realities of business.
Yeah. Very good. Now, I think the audience here, they might be in different stages of their journey in terms of looking at carbon markets, carbon credits. And today, at least in the headlines, there seems to be this narrative or rhetoric, right? Certain types of carbon credits might be better than others. Maybe removals count, reductions count, technology-based solutions are more durable than nature-based solutions. What is ICVCM's view around that?
ICVCM recognizes the enormity of the challenge we face in getting countries to take ambitious action, in getting corporates to step onto decarbonisation pathways. And the IPCC guidance requires all kinds of action, every tool in the box, all kinds of reductions, removals, technology and nature. And so, we're really an and organization, reductions and removals, technology and nature, divest, invest and decarbonize and buy carbon credits. And we also are really conscious of the global framework for carbon markets, where countries that are engaging in meeting their own targets at the international level are allowed to choose the way they get there. And they're not told they have to use removals or they have to use reductions or they have to only use nature and they can't use technology. They have a choice at the international level as to how they meet that target using carbon markets. And so, for us, it's really important that we are pulling on all the levers and helping governments and companies find all the mitigation opportunities there are to help them decarbonize.
To put it simply, can I ask you then, if a company uses or purchase reductions, removals, technology, nature-based credits, right? Assuming they respect the mitigation hierarchy, would that to put it very shortly, is that considered Paris aligned?
Is that considered Paris aligned? I mean, what does Paris aligned mean? What we're trying to do in the Paris Agreement is get every country to take ambitious action and to put forward ambitious plans for decarbonizing their economy. And how they do that is up to them, right? How they come to that is up to them. And in the same way, if you ask a company to take on a decarbonization target, that to some degree, recognizing there are ways of doing things within your value chain first, you should have that opportunity to say, this is a business sensitive way of bringing my corporate action, my corporate emissions towards net zero over time, and then that's Paris aligned. So
very clear, speaking from the architect of Article 6. Now let's move on to Asia. Where do you see opportunities in Asia?
I mean, the thing about what's going on here is you have really an opportunity to get it right and get it right now, because you have a load of incentives for decarbonization. You have the energy transition challenge. You have the opportunity of finding ways to incentivize the energy transition through carbon markets and other financing, and really bring that huge potential bubble of emissions, take that out of the economy. You also have huge potential to find ways to really look at the agriculture sector and decarbonize the agriculture sector, look at the way that rice is growing, look at broader agricultural and nature issues, and create from that financial incentives to go further on mitigation. So I think really what we're seeing here is countries that have the opportunity to deliver projects that supply carbon markets and bring finance into those countries because of that, and countries that are willing to support carbon markets as a demand center and enable companies to buy. And so you can create mitigation by having supply and demand in the region for the focused on the priorities of the region around agriculture and energy.
Excellent. Now, I'll move on to my last question. But before that, I would like to ask the audience if you've got any questions to put it on Pigeonhole. I've got a stream of questions now. Amy, my final question to you. What would your message be to boards and C-suites in terms of how they're thinking about carbon markets and how they can take action today rather than adopt a wait and see approach?
You know, at a very basic level, the science is clear. So whatever's going on politically, whatever is and isn't happening in other parts of the world on carbon, on climate, on the energy transition, the science remains the same. And we continue to watch Fortune 500 and other companies and, the Forbes lists, big companies continue to start to decarbonize, right? And it's a risk issue. You can't credibly be involved in the management of a large company now and not have a decarbonization plan. You can't credibly sit and do nothing instead of acting just because of concerns about what is the right way to act. It is really clear that shareholder value and risk management require decarbonization plans. And carbon credits, carbon markets, related actions support that journey, that credible decarbonization plan. They help companies to deliver decarbonization strategies that they have committed to. So, it's fairly basic. The global politics is not the issue. It's a risk issue for the C-suite to manage. And if they're not managing it, at some point they will be undermining shareholder value. And at some point that will impact their fiduciary duties. And at some point, someone will hold them to account for not having managed risk effectively. So, decarbonization plans are essential. Transition plans are essential. And, carbon markets are there to support that risk management and unlock mitigation and unlock climate finance that just doesn't otherwise move around the world in this time of constrained public purses and, isolationist thinking.
Thank you. Excellent response. Let me move on to the first question. It's related to Asia, right? There is a knowledge and implementation gap for many corporates in Asia on knowing how to access and assess quality carbon credits, right? What actionable approach can you advise?
By CCP labeled credits. That is one of the reasons why the CCPs were designed, because it was historically quite difficult for corporates to know how to use carbon markets effectively within their decarbonization journey. And the purpose of the CCPs is that it helps corporates that have not got huge numbers of in-house experts to identify a set of carbon credits operated by the most robust programs that have been reviewed so many times that we know how good they are. Mm-hmm. The CCPs are basically a meta standard for quality. And if you find those credits, you probably have done the due diligence you need to do to be confident that you can report to your CEO that you've taken the relevant steps to ensure you've protected the company.
Understood. It's a segue to the next question, which is around financing. And I think that's a topic important to Ecosperity and central to Ecosperity. Now, why is it taking so long to come up with common implementable standards that give comfort to the financing markets?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. The original independent voluntary carbon markets were really delivering bespoke products to bespoke corporates that were buying particular types of projects. And it wasn't necessarily a collective endeavor. And what we've been able to do at the ICVCM with the Core Carbon Principles is bring the community of independent project developers, standards, exchanges together around a discussion point for a global threshold for integrity and a comparable set of standards across the market. And so what's been really interesting working in the last year or so is to see how ready for that collective endeavor everybody was. And that's where the hindsight comes in. Why did it not happen before? And why are we not at net zero already? So now we have the opportunity to bring everybody together in this market and move everyone continually over time towards a scaled and high integrity market.
And we also need demand signals for that. And
That's
just a plug, after this session, there is going to be a chat between VCMI and Fred, CEO of GenZero, at the Activity Hub just outside, where they're going to launch their Scope 3 guidance for corporates. So do join us there. Now, you spoke about Asia, opportunities in Asia, and one of it is energy transition. There is a question here. What is ICVCM's position on transition credits, a new asset class to accelerate retirement of coal-fired power plants? Are you ready to assess methodologies as soon as they are published?
Last week, we launched a continuous improvement stakeholder group to look at the conceptual roots and the requirements for transition credits. So last week, our stakeholder community started to get together to talk about those issues. At the same time, when and if a methodology comes into the ICVCM and separately, it would be assessed against our framework. What we're trying to do in the stakeholder work right now, and we hear from all those actors, including mass and traction around how it works, we're trying to understand what does it look like to offer energy transition crediting in a just transition. And so those two components, how do you count it, how do you measure it, and how do you ensure it has the justice component that's really the just in the just energy transition? So, do we have a position just yet? We assess everything against the assessment framework if it comes in. What work are we doing to understand this new asset class? We're bringing everybody together who has expertise in that area to discuss what are the core things we must get right when we're creating these systems. So, that was our exciting news from last week. And obviously for this region, that's a really interesting discussion.
So if, let's say, a methodology is released tomorrow at the summit to ICVCM, how long can we expect before a full, robust assessment is done and whether ICVCM decides or not to assign a CCP label to that particular methodology?
It will join the queue, and the queue is a few months long. And then it will go through an assessment process separate from the stakeholder discussion, where it will be looked against the 10 core carbon principles and the governance system of the program. If it's not CCP approved already, would have to be checked. So if it comes in under one of our CCP eligible programs, it would pass straight into methodological assessment. So a few months. But one of the really interesting things we see when we are going through that assessment program is also that's a fairly good discussion with the program that owns that methodology, and we can also bring in changes and discussions with those programs. They're usually willing to improve methodologies over time. So that assessment process is also often a journey, which helps.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and I'd like to maybe invite you to offer some key messages and some closing thoughts around opportunities and how corporates should think about moving now and overcoming the current paralysis that we are seeing in the market, and how we can take action and where ICVCM plays a role. And what else can they do? Can they look at ratings? Can they look at insurance to mitigate some of these risks?
Thanks, and thanks for the invite again to be here today. It's been a great chance to talk about what I think is really important, which is that every corporate needs to find its decarbonisation journey that works for its business, for its shareholders, for its product line. And what's really important is that in that journey, there's an understanding that we have dealt with the historic problems in a fairly scattered carbon market, that they are a flexible bipartisan tool, carbon markets, to help everybody achieve more mitigation than otherwise happens and unlock finance. And there are a number of things corporates can use and do to help them set their plan. And, CCPs help you choose good carbon credits. The VCMI claims code helps you decide how to use carbon credits. Many companies take SBTI targets. People report with the GHG protocol. The tools are there for corporate action. And the real question is what does it further take to get corporates to understand their role in the decarbonisation journey? And we just all have to get on that journey. And what's great about this region is the incentives are coming from demand, supply, and government engagement in that decarbonisation of corporates.
Thank you. Very well put. And with that, please join me in thanking Amy.